Hello there, my name is John and thanks for tuning into my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the question of, is God too holy or pure or righteous to look upon evil or sin? Now, a lot of fundamentalist Christians get this idea that God is too holy to look upon sin and things like that, and they get this idea from a verse in the book of Habakkuk, which we are going to be reading here shortly. But the reason I wanted to bring up this video is because I think that a lot of these fundamentalists that use this verse to make that point, they will also use it as a defense of their reason to say that when Jesus died on the cross and then he said, Father, Father, or my God, why hast thou forsaken me? They'll use these verses, these two verses that are completely, or at least not directly related to each other. They will take them and try to make a theology connecting the two verses and saying, well, see, in this verse it says that God's too holy to look upon evil, and then and then there's some verses where Paul talks about that all the sin of mankind was placed upon Jesus, and he was nailed to a tree, becoming a curse for us, and things like that. And then we see, Jesus saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And, it seems like if you just take all of those things and isolate them out of their context, it can make it look like that, yes, God was punishing Jesus, or all of the sin was literally transferred to Jesus and he was being punished on our behalf. But when you look at these passages in their context, like we talked about a couple weeks ago in the video I did about penal substitutionary atonement, where Jesus said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? We look at what he was quoting from, which is Psalm 22, or what we know today as Psalm 22, and we actually see that that was actually so far from him saying that God is punishing him for the sins of mankind or anything like that. And if you actually read the whole psalm, it's just like, I think I gave the example of, like, if you say the first line of a song, you can kind of get the idea of what the song is going to say. Like when Jesus said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The Jews in his day, the people that heard him, some of them probably would have been familiar with that from memorizing the Psalms and things like that. And just like, now, maybe most of you in my audience are not familiar with some of these songs, but I'll mention a couple of them. I like some rock music, so I apologize if some of the music or the songs that I'm about to mention are offensive to you or anything like that, but this one's probably not as offensive, so I'll give you the example. I like the group, well, I don't necessarily listen to a lot of their music, but Disturbed, it's kind of a more heavy metal or hard rock group. But they do a rendition of the Simon and Garfunkel, I think that's their name, their song called The Sound of Silence. Now, if you just, I could just quote the first line to you, which is, hello darkness, my old friend. Now, if I just said that line, you might, if you had no idea, you've never heard that song before, you might be like, well, what in the heck is he talking about? Or who are you talking to that's named Darkness? Who is your old friend, Darkness? But but maybe I'm trying to convey something that, like, the message of that song is conveying that is more than just what is said in those words. Or like there's another song, it's a little more on the heavy or hard rock side, which is the song Bullet with Butterfly Wings by the Smashing Pumpkins. And I don't know if it's the Smashing Pumpkins or just Smashing Pumpkins, so I'm sorry if I get that wrong. But the very first line, before any of the instruments or anything start, the singer says, the world is a vampire, and then it starts with the drums and guitar and all that stuff. And really that line is not in the rest of the song or anything like that. There's a lot of other words, but if you hear me say that, and if you're familiar with those songs, you can kind of get the message that is being conveyed from that line. So I say all that to say that's kind of the idea when Jesus was saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He wasn't making some ontological statement about about that God is forsaking him literally, and that he's abandoning him, and he's transferring all the sin and guilt of Adam or the rest of mankind onto him and punishing him for it. It was something poetic that he was quoting to get a point across, and hopefully that point has been made clear. And if you haven't watched the video I did on penal substitutionary atonement, I would encourage you to go watch that to get the full context of why Jesus was saying that. But anyway, we're going to go on to look at Habakkuk, which is in Habakkuk chapter 1. There's a verse that people often quote in conjunction with that passage where Jesus said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And they'll use it to say that God was literally turning his eyes on Jesus because he couldn't behold all of the sin that was placed on him. And these passages are like not directly related in any way, that, at least that I can tell. So, but let's go ahead and read it, and I'll try to demonstrate. We'll just read it first, and then we'll get to the points after that. So I'll start here in Habakkuk 1 verse 12, and just for a little bit of context, you can read the whole chapter. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but basically the book of Habakkuk is like kind of a narrative between the author Habakkuk and God. At least that's what most scholars and theologians believe, is that it's kind of a back and forth dialogue between Habakkuk and God, and about the judgment of Israel by the Chaldeans or Babylon. And so Habakkuk here is responding to God about the judgment that Israel is going through by the Babylonians, and God is allowing Babylon to judge Israel for their sin and their wickedness and turning away from him and things like that. So here in verse 12, starting in verse 12 I should say, it says, Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and O mighty God, thou hast established them for correction. So he's talking about here, so he's responding to what God said in some previous verses about that he is ordaining these means of the Chaldeans or the Babylonians to come and judge Israel. And then he continues on in verse 13. He says, Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Now, that's not even a complete verse that I just read. That is only that's less than half of the verse of Habakkuk 1:13. That's like maybe a third of that verse. But you'll so often you will probably often hear, or you may have often heard of pastors quoting that little portion of the verse. It says, Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. And then there's a colon there, which is continuing the thought. So he stops that, but he's going to continue the thought with a question about that thought that he just made, that statement. So that was not maybe this is Habakkuk demonstrating how he views God, how he sees God, that he's so holy and maybe he can't look upon evil, or at least from his logic and reasoning, it seems like God wouldn't be able to look upon evil. But he continues with a question. He says, Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? So Habakkuk he's trying to make a point here when he's in dialogue with God. He's saying, God, I know that you are so holy and pure, and you can't tolerate this evil. You can't just allow this evil and sin to continue on. And he says he uses the terminology saying that you can't look upon sin or evil, but I'm thinking that he's probably being metaphorical there. I don't think he's trying to say that literally. Some people might debate that, but then he says, but Lord, but wherefore, or another word you could use is like, maybe he's saying why. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? So he's asking God, if you are this holy and you can't tolerate sin, well, why are you just allowing these Babylonians, who are so much more wicked than Israel and who are committing all kinds of abominations and are they're your enemies, and none of them worship you and things like that? Why are you tolerating them and not just wiping them out of existence? Why are you allowing them to go through? Like, why can't you just send a tsunami or an earthquake or some kind of like pestilence or something to judge us? Why are you allowing these wicked people to live and to continue in their wickedness and punish Israel, who are more righteous? And notice, this is from Habakkuk's perspective. This is not the Bible saying that Israel was more righteous, because I think if you, at least from the traditional Christian perspective, there is none righteous. I mean, we're all sinners. There's no one that's perfect. There's no one that is never made a mistake. No man, I should say, outside of Jesus Christ, which we would all agree that Jesus was sinless from what we can tell in Scripture, but from Habakkuk's perspective, he is thinking that Israel is more righteous, and why are you allowing these wicked people to destroy the righteous people of Israel? And so, yeah, he's making this point, and it goes on. There's several other verses I could read to continue on that passage, and you can do that. I would encourage you to research that whole chapter and even the whole book of Habakkuk. But I think just if you read that whole verse in context, that destroys this notion that God has like this thing where he just can't, like, anytime he sees evil, he has to avert his gaze, and he can't look upon it, and things like that. Like, we think it's almost like this, just this narcissistic version of God that, like, he can only stand to be around people that worship him and that love him and that agree with him, and he can't interact with anyone who is his enemy or who is his opposite or anything like that. And we can see that this whole idea of God not being able to be in the presence of sin or evil, or to be able to look upon it, you can see that you can clearly refute that if you just look at the life of Jesus. I mean, Jesus was interacting with, like, in the Old Testament, leprosy is one of the things that a lot of theologians say that this is like a picture of sin. And, well, Jesus was touching unclean people all the time, and he was doing things that, according to Jewish law, the law of Moses and things like that, they would have been considered unclean, and it would have been considered against the law and different things like that, or against certain ordinances and all that in the law, for Jesus to do some of the things that he did when he was healing lepers and like the woman with the issue of blood, and healing people from the dead. I mean, it was considered unclean and unholy to touch anyone that was dead or interact with them and things like that. And then even the example in, I think it's John chapter 8 maybe, where the woman that is caught in adultery is brought before Jesus. And I'm not trying to paint any kind of lewd picture through this, what I'm about to say, but I mean, this woman, she was caught in, they said that she was caught in the act of adultery, and whether or not she was. I mean, there's speculation about maybe these people were set her up for something, or maybe she was framed or something like that, but that's beside the point. But if this woman was literally caught in the act of adultery and they brought her right after that to Jesus, she probably was not dressed in a in a modest, conservative, or fundamentalistly speaking, as if I'm speaking like a fundamentalist Christian, she probably wasn't dressed modestly, or maybe wasn't even dressed at all. The Bible doesn't say, so I'm not going to try to add too much there, but so we don't know for sure. But Jesus probably, I mean, most certainly he did see evil, and he saw wicked things happening. I mean, for goodness sakes, he was crucified and he saw all that evil happening. But most Christians, like, do we think that he just stopped being God at that point? There are some, like, Gnostics and some people that would say that Jesus, maybe that God separated himself from the body of Jesus or something like that, or like he just became a spirit at that point and then just let his body suffer. But that's just getting into some ridiculous mental gymnastics when you get into all that. All of that to say, I think that we can easily dismiss the idea that God is like too holy, too pure, or too righteous to look upon sin, and that he was punishing Jesus for the guilt of Adam, or the guilt of all of mankind, and transferring that guilt, or the guilt from the sin of Adam onto himself from the rest of humanity. God was not punishing Jesus. What Jesus was crucified for, that was us that did that. That was mankind that did that. That was the religious elite, and that was the Roman Empire. They put Jesus to death because he challenged a lot of their dogma and their authority and things like that. It's plain and simple. I mean, when you do that kind of stuff, that usually tends to get a lot of people angry, and they crucified him. So I hope that this video made sense. Please feel free to share your comments, your thoughts. I always enjoy seeing those. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time, and God bless.